Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mr. Carlson's Lab. Let's get started. Welcome to the Grand Radio Receiver Restoration Project series here at Mr. Carlson's Lab. Now, something like this on YouTube has never been done before, and for obvious reasons. The amount of work involved in this is nothing short of incredible. But what we're going to do is very carefully and methodically electrically restore each one of these communications receivers. And then what we're going to do, once they work as they did when they rolled off the factory line, is we're going to compare them to each other to see which one really is the finest radio receiver. Now, we'll compare a bunch of things. We'll compare audio and we'll compare its reception and all sorts of different things. But we'll narrow this down in this series until we find basically the best overall communications receiver of the time. Now, don't be fooled by the age of these radio receivers. These radio receivers are nothing short of fantastic radio receivers even to this day. All right. So even now, a lot of these radio receivers, when they're restored and working up to factory spec, will perform just as good as any modern day radio receiver. The only thing is they don't have as many options. So this should be a lot of fun. Now you'll notice on top there's a wooden radio receiver right up here. This is, I guess you could say, a consumer grade radio receiver, and it's a very fine quality consumer grade radio receiver. We can even restore that one as well and compare a consumer grade radio receiver to something that was considered commercial grade down here. Now, these radio receivers were used way back in the day at government listening posts. They were used at FCC, DOC, all sorts of different things they were used for way back. This one here flew around in warbirds. So this one here was up in the air most of the time. Very, very good receiver, very, very sensitive. So this is a BC348 is what this one here is. This radio receiver is a CR88. It's, I guess you could say, almost identical to the AR88. So this one here, this one here is just here for reference sake. Now this one, I believe, has been restored or partially restored. I haven't opened it. I've had it for a long time, and I haven't opened any of these radio receivers. So we're going to go through these together. But this one here, I believe, is partially restored. I can tell by the cord on the back of it. It looks like it has a computer cord on the back of it coming out. So somebody's been in this one. The CR88, which is identical really to this thing, it has crystal phasing control. So this one here is, I guess you could say, a basket case. This one here is all original. It has a crack here in the dial, and I'll explain that. We'll go about repairing that as well. So this one here would be more of the challenge. So we're not gonna take an easy route and go for something that's been maybe partially restored. We're gonna go for the, for the most challenging of all. And of course, when we do that, that's the best learning tool, right? Because you get to see more of the restoration. There's no or less parts that could be or would be skipped in something like that. So I feel the logical process here would be to go from the easiest to the most difficult communications receiver. So the easiest would be one of these three, all right? So they're relatively easy, all three of these, which is the commercial or the consumer grade versus the two commercial grade ones. So whichever one you would like to see first, put down in the comments, and if there's enough, I guess you could say, comments on one particular receiver, we'll start with that one first. So it would be the General Electric, the BC348, so that's Bravo Charlie, BC348, and this one here is a CR for Canadian radio or Canadian receiver, 88, all right? So you can put what you would like to see first down in the comments, and then after that, I guess the row of difficulty or the level of difficulty would jump us over to the SP600. This is a Hammerlind over here. And then these two here, the Raquel RA17C12, or if you're in the UK, it's an RA117. This one here is very electrically complex. This one over here is very mechanically complex. This is an R390A made by the Collins company, Collins Radio Company, okay? So these two here are kind of a trade-off. Mechanically complex, electrically complex. So either one in the end, we'll take a look at which one you would like to see first. So I've restored all of these in the past, and I know how each one of them works, but it'll be fun to go through each one of these things with you and restore each one. And of course, I can convey and share all the knowledge of restoring these types of radio receivers with you along the way. So I invite you to grab a coffee and a pen and paper when we start and take notes. Now, the complexity in each one of these receivers renders it impossible to do in one video, unless of course you want a 5 to 10 hour video, right? So it's going to be a multiple part series, and we'll just tackle one particular part of the receiver at a time, move on to the next until we have a completely restored radio receiver. And then we'll try it out and move on to the next, and try it out and move on to the next. And then we'll have a whole lineup of restored radio receivers. And at that time comes the coax switch. We'll switch between each one of these and listen to actual incoming signals. So we'll call this a dynamic style test. We're not going to have a signal generator set to a specific level and, try and compare that way. We're going to actually listen to real world signals coming in through an antenna, which also shows us how well this will tune an antenna, things like that, pre-selection and all that. And we'll really get a good idea of how these radio receivers really did perform way back when, and which one could be considered nowadays to be the top performer. So I definitely invite you to take part in this series. Again, never been done on YouTube, so this is a first for this channel and a first for YouTube. And some of you might say I'm crazy for taking on this type of work, especially when I'm still building the labs. But you want to know something? This will be a lot of fun, and it'll give us a lot of work to do here in the future to get this stuff done together. So let's take a closer look at these radio receivers. I'll start at this end and we'll work our way down, and I'll show you the similarities between the AR88 and the CR88, and we'll move our way down to the end. And in the end, I have a special little treat for you here regarding the Raquel RA17C12, and I'll share that with you at the end of the video. Let's take a look at these three communications receivers first. This one here is a BC348, and this one is used to flying around in the sky. It's usually in some form of a flying fortress or something like that. And they're nothing short, again, of a fantastic radio receiver. Now, if I remember correctly, this particular one we may have looked inside of in an earlier video. I seem to recall the tape in the window. I have 4 of these things, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the worst out of the 4, and we're going to restore that one. That way I can convey the most information to you, and it'll be the most in-depth restoration. If this one happens to be the worst, we'll stick with this one right here. So this one here we have looked inside of before. I have not touched anything inside this radio receiver at all, just opened the case. And then I have those other 3 which are completely not touched at all. If I remember correctly, some of them are pretty bad. So we'll take a look. This one is the most aesthetically pleasing, so maybe I'll take parts and mix and match and try and make one very nice radio receiver. So at any rate, so this is a BC348. Very, very good communications receiver. A lot of fun to operate and own. Most of these things came with a dynamotor, so they buzz away. This one here, if I remember correctly, and I can tell by the holes, it looks like somebody's drilled some holes in the top here. This is going to have some form of a power supply in it. If I have another one with a dynamotor, and it seems to be the worst basket case of them all, we'll also take that one and convert it to a power supply that plugs into the wall, because running a dynamotor for shortwave listening isn't very pleasing. So listening to that buzz in the background. The Spilsbury and Tyndall radio that I did, you can get an idea of what a dynamotor sounds like in one of these things. Not exactly fun to listen to. Okay, so we'll end up changing the power supply out in this too, and we'll probably make it vacuum tube just to kind of keep it era specific. This here is a CR88, which is the Canadian version of the AR88. They're virtually identical. This one here has a crystal phasing control on it. You can see they've got 3 knobs here, and you can see whereas instead they would have only have had the 2 there, so they've reduced the size of the knobs and added one more knob to this radio. Now this one here looks to be all original. I haven't opened this at all. I know there's a cloth cord on the back side of this, so that tells me that chances are there isn't a whole lot of, I guess you can say, tampering on this one. So this one is going to be more of the challenge than this one. I know this one has had somebody in it because it has a computer cord on it and everything. So we're going to go with the more challenging of the 2. This one has a cracked dial plastic here. So there's usually a dial glass, but this is plastic. So this is cracked, so we'll end up replacing that too. Again, they're virtually the same. They've got just, you know, I could say silky smooth tuning when they're fixed and working, and nice S meter on, or dB meter on this side here. So these are dB above 1 microvolt. Very nice meters. When they age, they go this kind of a dark, kind of an orange color, which I find to be actually kind of more pleasing. So these haven't aged as bad. It's more of a yellowy kind of color. This one is very dark orange. It looks nice in the dark. So again, these radios glow in the dark and they look very, very nice. I have a parts unit for this one here, so you might even see 2 of them on the bench. We'll take one apart to make one very, very nice one. So that's these 3 radio receivers here. Very, very nice broadcast band cruisers and shortwave cruisers. If you like listening to distant stations or broadcast band DX, these radio receivers are fantastic for that. And a lot of selectivity as well, so you can really narrow in. Very, very nice receivers to own. If you ever have a chance to own an AR88, which would be this one, or the CR88 over here, I would strongly suggest the CR88 over the AR88 just because the crystal phasing and things like that has an extra control on it. But whether you get either or, they're both just great radio receivers when they're restored. Let's move down the line to some of the more complex stuff. Here are another 3 very neat radio receivers. So I included this General Electric into the lineup here just because this is such a stunning looking, I guess you could say, countertop type of radio receiver. The dial on this thing is just huge. Like, this is my hand right on the dial glass. Like, look at how big that is. And what they've done is they've included little, it almost looks like the plastic is notched in between each band, and they have just a little connection every now and then. So I imagine what they've probably done is they're lighting up each one of these as you move the band selector, which is this one here. And that sounds a lot like a television tuner. And what's really odd is this whole thing kind of looks like it could have been a smaller television, but what they said is let's make this radio look like a television or something like that. I don't know what they were thinking when they put this together, but it's so incredibly unique. I wanted to throw this into the lineup. Now, I have not looked inside this or anything. Before I purchased this was a barn find again. So before I went and picked this thing up, I looked online to see what was inside this on the computer, and it's very impressive. So from the back side of this radio with the cover on, it looks like it's all complete. So this should be a really, really neat restoration. For a consumer grade radio receiver, I would say that this is definitely up there. All right, definitely up there. And just the way that they've done the bands and everything, it looks like they really didn't spare any money on this particular model. So very excited to go through this one. So we can do this first. We can do the BC348 or the CR88 first, whichever one you like. Again, in the comments section below, if one is overwhelmingly chosen over the rest, we'll go for that one first. All right. And when I say we're going to start on this restoration series, I mean in the next couple of days. From the time this video is posted, we're getting right into this because there's a lot of work to be done here. This here is a Raquel RA17C12, a very, very, I guess you could say for the time, high-end communications receiver. You can see this is it looks like camera film here, and when you move the kilocycles dial, the whole dial moves. So it's like a camera film that winds up and unwinds on two rollers in here. And yeah, it looks just like camera film, except it's clear. And the dial, I guess you could call it, is almost as accurate as something that's digital. Okay, so if we're at 1 and this is 200 here, so we would be at 1200 AM right now. Okay, and when you're on the bar, it's at 1200, and if you move this up, you would be at 1.210, so you'd be at 1210 right on that bar right there, and 1220 and 1230 and 1240 and 1250 AM. It's just that accurate, right down to the little spacing between the bars. This is the kilocycles, so you can move this basically one whole megacycle. Okay, you can see how smooth that is. And this here is the megacycles section. So this is every 1 megacycle. So if we left this at 400, or say, we'll just, to make this easy, we'll go to 500. So this would be 5.5 megacycles. That'd be at 4.5 megacycles. 3.5 megacycles, 2.5, 1.5, and then you'd be at, 500 AM. And that's how these things work. So, and these go right to 30 megahertz, right? 29.999. So, very electrically complex. Let's put it that way. Very electrically complex. And the pan adapter for this is more complex than the receiver itself. So the pan scope for this thing is pretty incredible. Very neat radio receiver. This is an R390. So I'm just going to move the camera over here just a little bit. And we can probably get the SP600 in here as well. So there we go. R390A, much like an odometer, pardon the shaking, I'm just going to move the monitor here. Much like an odometer on a car, you can see that. You see the digits roll around in here. And then we have the megacycles, which will move this around as well. Very mechanically complex and extremely sensitive receiver. These, again, were used everywhere. These things were used by, everybody way back in the day. Anything that was important, any listening station that was important had one of these things in it. And they were used through the 80s and everything. So for something that is this early, they kept using these things just because they're such a fantastic receiver. So this one here will be a lot of fun to go through. It has a sea of powdered iron slugs that move around when you move the dials around. They just move around like a sea, and they're the amount of tuning and the amount of thought from the engineers at Collins to put this thing together is nothing short of incredible. It really is. This has got more gears and cams than most cars. So at the end, we're over to the SP600. I'm just going to move the camera and get a little bit closer to this one. SP600, one of my favorite receivers. This is the Hammerlind SP600, and I'd have to say probably one of my very favorite communications receivers. I've had so many of these things over time, and I've done so much to them. So I've added pan scopes to them. I've added frequency counters to them. So I've given them digital displays. I've completely redesigned the audio section so they sound like you're receiving FM. I've taken this tuning lock control and I've put one VR in behind here, or one potentiometer that goes all the way from communications audio right to full range broadcast sounding audio within one control. I've done all of these very interesting mods, and I have all the paperwork for all that kind of stuff. So after this is restored, maybe we'll do some of that to this particular receiver, and you'll see the difference. Even with the factory iron in this radio receiver, you can make them sound like FM. So a lot of people say, oh, you got to pull the factory iron out of this thing, the factory audio transformer, to make them sound any good. Wrong. They sound incredible with a factory iron in them. You just have to modify the circuitry around it. So anyways, I'll explain that more when we get into the restoration and possibly the modifications to this particular radio receiver. Nice, just comfortable radio receiver to use. You'll talk to a lot of people that have used very complex radio receivers like the Raquel and the R390A and all of those, and then they come across these ones, and these ones were always just more pleasing to use. They're just a real comfortable cruising receiver. You can see this little pointer here as you move this up. So we go right up to the top band here, and it points to the band at use. This sounds like it's grinding rocks as I'm turning this thing. Ugh. Listen to that. Ugh. Definitely in need of some lubrication in there. Again, haven't been inside this thing at all, so I don't know what we're up against. So this should be a lot of fun to discover this together. That's nice and smooth. That's nice and smooth. Now, there's lots of different models of this particular one. You got to be very careful. If you want something to listen to the broadcast band, you have to make sure that it does have the broadcast band in it, and that's usually indicated by the letters after the SP600 here. So this one here does have the broadcast band, and that's the reason that I've chosen this one, so that we can cruise the broadcast band and take a listen. It's always busy here. And of course we have all the shortwave bands as well. Not as busy as a broadcast band. So every one of these radio receivers that I've chosen in this lineup, including the CR88, has the broadcast band. If you get an AR88LF, which is the low frequency, they didn't include the broadcast band. So you got to make sure that you have a CR88 or an AR88 that does have the broadcast band if you want to really enjoy that particular part. So if you're buying one and you see a beautiful AR88, if it says LF behind it, it's missing the broadcast band. So you got to be careful with that. Some of them also have, in the AR and the CR88s, they don't have the S meter. They have just basically a plate that they've put in there as well. So some things to keep in mind with that. This one has a broadcast band, and all of them will receive the broadcast band in this lineup. So that way we can very, very easily compare them and listen to some broadcast band DX in the end, which is one of my favorite things to do. Tuning in those distant stations from around the world. And yeah, it is a lot of fun. So that's the lineup, and that's what we're going to do. Now, I have a special little treat for you here involving the RA17C12, or if you're in the UK, the RA117. So I'm going to show you something here in a moment, and then I'm going to share a very old video with you, a video that goes way back before my days of YouTube, and I'll show you one of my best little pals. Here's a video of my little radio room pal. He's my little radio room buddy, and this video is very special to me. I'm very lucky to have this. So this goes way back before my days of YouTube, so pardon the video quality. The radio that you're going to see is not this particular radio itself, but a radio that's identical to it. I've restored many of these radios, and well, this one's probably 15 or 20 down the line now. But anyways, the radio that you see is identical to this, and it's on its side on the floor. And the dial of interest is the kilocycles dial and this particular knob right here, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, as I say, my little radio room pal was there with me whenever I was tuning these radios and whenever I was listening to the shortwave bands. Now, I guess he was getting a little impatient for this one to be done, so let's take a look at the video. Rest in peace, little fella. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your life. If you're enjoying my videos, you can let me know by giving me a big thumbs up and hang around. There'll be more videos like this coming in the near future. We'll be taking a look at vacuum tube and solid state electronic devices alike. So if you haven't subscribed, now would be a good time to do that as well. If you'd like to be notified as soon as I post a new video, don't forget to tap that bell symbol. If you're interested in taking your electronics knowledge to the next level and learning electronics in a very different and effective way and gaining access to many of my personal electronic inventions and designs, you're definitely going to want to check out my ongoing electronics course on Patreon. I'll put the link just below the Show More tab below the video's description, and I'll also pin the link at the top of the comments section. So if you click on the link, it'll take you right there. All right, until next time, take care. Bye for now.